Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kathy Willis. I'm based at the University of Oxford. I'm currently in my room in Oxford, and I'm the current president of the International Biogeography Society. So it gives me very great pleasure to welcome you all here today, but also to our inaugural lecture of the International Biogeography Society Funk Lecture Series. Vicky Funk was one of our founding members who very, very sadly died last year. And it's very fitting that Mark Lomolino has agreed to give the first lecture, not least because he was a friend and colleague of Vicky's, but also a former president and co-founder of IBS, which is also true of Vicky Funk. So Mark currently holds a chair in biogeography in the State University of New York, and his research combines empirical and theoretical approaches across a broad range of scales to explore patterns in the geography of life. But beside his own pure research, Mark is probably best known to many of you for the exceptional and excellent textbooks that he's edited over many years. And I would say probably the textbook that is the backbone of most biogeography undergraduate courses across the world. I certainly used it, and I certainly taught from it. This is Biogeography, Biological Diversity Across Space and Time. It was first published in 1983. It's now in its 5th edition. So I think that is a true testament to how excellent this book is and what a legacy it is for teaching and inspiring people in biogeography. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to you, Mark, to give us your lecture in this first series. Thank you.
Okay, so what was the first question? You're just not showing up to me.
So the first question was a general question about actually, you've given us a fantastic overview of where we've got to. And my question really was, you talked about collaboration, but where are those sort of hidden parts that we should now be focusing our energies on in terms of research? Are there areas of the world that you think would be most important to go to, or particular topics we should be looking at?
Yeah, so there are so many places, and again, in a holistic field, no one person, I'm not really dodging this, but maybe I am, no one person should be able to set the agenda for the emerging generation of students. I mean, what I try to emphasize is understanding from the past, and it's a great privilege to continue to connect with the luminaries that I talked about. And von Humboldt's approach is still something that's a goal that we may never achieve, but we have the tools and now the society and the centers that to really understand how important the holistic approaches is, and integrative approaches, and also collegiality, and developing the tools to work with other people. I still am amazed that we're still discovering species, and of course we want to discover them, describe them before they're lost. We still are, and one of the great advances that I didn't stumble on, but luckily enough, I began to work with the paleo people, and continually opening my eyes on what we thought was history is really ecology and evolution, and how the two work together. So there are so many things that the new generation is doing. And the last thing I finished with might be a surprise, emphasizing ignorance, which I'm all too proud of to brag about from time to time, but to say and identify what we don't know is really the first step in terms of developing these revolutionary insights that William Smith and Alfred Lothar Wegener and Marie Thorpe and James Brown and so many other people. I mean, once you get to know these people, you realize that they had that combination, that full combination that I tried to summarize at the end of what might be the common ingredients to actually making these major advances, these transformative advances in this extremely challenging science.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a number of questions in the question box. I don't know if you can see them, Mark, or not.
No, all I see is no sound is coming. Somebody's saying no sound's coming through, but
Okay, all right. Okay. I'll see if I can. I can't actually call them up either. Sandra, can you see them there?
Yes, I can see them. Yeah.
You pick them out. Sorry, I can't see them either now.
Please.
So you answer the tough questions, and I'll take the easy ones.
I'm not sure if the Flavia Tetean was replied, the one that could ecological niche modeling help overcome the Wallacean shortfall?
I suspect so. You know, I know what ecological niche modeling is. I've not done any myself. And, you know, we're looking at really three phases or, you know, three areas of biogeography and distinctiveness of place. So the geography of life in the past, current conditions, but also we know how dynamic the Earth might well be in the next decade or two. And that's especially when niche modeling can help. But of course, there's so many challenges to niche modeling. I mean, we can look at, again, as I think I said in part of this talk, that the long list of species in any particular taxon. For very few of those species do we have good information on their geographic ranges. And then for even a smaller fraction of those, I suspect that we have good information on what their ecological, environmental limits and associations really are. And then throw in the extremely complicating but realistic assumption or admission that species are affecting other species. I mean, that those positive and negative feedbacks are what are characteristics to really complex systems. So I'm not quite sure, you know, how close we are to niche modeling at the level that will handle the big picture. But for a particular focal species, yeah, and tracking that, you know, into the future, that's probably one of the greatest sets of tools we might have, or, you know, the more focal question.
So I have seen one question here. Now I've worked out how to access them, which I think is an excellent question. Do you consider that the biogeography of microorganisms is fundamentally different than the biogeography of macroorganisms?
Okay, yeah, maybe I'm pulling up something myself. So the sound was a little off. The biogeography of microbes versus macrobes? Yeah, I have no experience. So here's my humility. I have no experience studying the biogeography of microbes, but the surprises, again, set of surprises, I've handled, or other people have taught me about, is that there really is a biogeography of microbes, even though Becking and Bering said there is, let's see, everything is everywhere, but the environment selects. It's not quite true, even for microbes. And so there is a biogeography, but maybe very different, and we're just exploring that. There's also, I mean, I've got colleagues in marine sciences who at first said there was no biogeography of the sea, but of course there is, and there was, and so who knows, you know, what it would be like in the future. But yeah, they may be fundamentally different. The person wasn't asking about the marine realm, but there's a three-dimensional system, and typically we're used to studying things across the thin surface layer of the Earth. But then, you know, I think it was Tom Coons, the bat specialist, who pointed us towards the skies and said, no, many things are using the air as a three-dimensional system as well. And that's when he established that field of aerial ecology.
So another question that's come through is, what about the global change as new diversification opportunities? Or put another way, does global change represent new diversification opportunities?
Yeah, it's a shame we can't open up a dialogue because I learn a lot more from the people asking these questions than I could try and fake an answer here. Yeah, but that's why, you know, for a number of reasons, why the biogeography of humanity is so important. Again, learning from the history of how the same environmental topographic features that influence the dispersal and the dynamic geography of other species also influenced us. To what degree, does that still influence us today? And again, a set of I thought intriguing and again surprising lessons was that we also have a geography of our own species, and morphological, physiological characteristics of humans do vary across the globe, and some of that's due to natural selection. Some of it's due to cultural evolution as well. But that should be carried as part of the toolkit of biogeographies into the future. I mean, we do need to continue to collaborate with anthropologists and archaeologists to better understand what the future environments might be like in not too distant future.
So the following question very much leads on from that. Somebody said, does or should biogeography have a stand on the start date for the Anthropocene?
Okay.
I think biogeographers have, but of course we don't agree when that start date should be. And there's some wonderful writing about it. And what's in a name? Well, there are good reasons that people argue about those things. For us, or for me anyway, what I'm most interested in is the geographic template, the highly non-random variation in environmental conditions. And in this case, what's important is how we affect it. And there's no starting point that we could say that's the first time we affected the environment. You could go back 200,000 years, but before Homo sapiens, there was Homo erectus, which apparently influenced its environments too, across what was a surprisingly very broad range for Homo erectus. So, I'll let the other people argue, the semantical issues there, but what we're interested in is how our species has in the past and will continue to affect the geographic template.
So there's a question in here from somebody who says, I have a question related to careers in biogeography. Considering your last statement about collaboration and creativity, what would you say about new frontiers in biogeography? Specifically, what are the opportunities for early careers in the coming years?
That's a simple question, right? A softball question during the pandemic, and with the U.S. elections coming up, I mean, who knows what the world's going to be? So in terms of opportunities, I mean, fortunately, unfortunately, we're going to keep challenging the character of nature, and who else but biogeographers to better understand, first of all, these broad scale patterns, and also develop these holistic explanations for them. I think what we do actually is something that should attract anybody interested in science at any level of education, right down to the child who's walking around the forest and asking you questions about why is this here, or why where's the things that I saw on TV, why aren't they here?
So another one, you'll have to explain this question to me as well. What is your take on the Buffon and Linnaeus controversy? Buffon, B-U-F-F-O-N.
Yeah, Georges Louis Leclerc, Buffon, and actually, just as an aside, I probably never pronounced his name correctly. So this is not a plug, but today I just had one of a new book on biogeography I produced. It's on audiobook now, and it sounds so much better than when I read it to myself, because the narrator is so good, and he just pronounced that name, and I realized, oh, that's how I should pronounce it. So Buffon and Linnaeus were essentially contemporaries of the 1700s. And I'm not quite sure which controversy he's talking about. I mean, I know the Buffon, we know him, and I mentioned him in this particular talk for being one of the better first articulations of the the distinctiveness of place, the biological distinctiveness of place, and different regions of the globe, even those with similar environmental conditions, are inhabited by different. Well, he was the first to actually demonstrate that clearly, mostly focusing on mammals of the tropics in Africa and South America, and that was quite different than what the doctrine of the day, and really the doctrine for the next few decades, said. And Linnaeus held fast to the doctrine that species were immutable.
Yeah.
Not only did the Earth not change, climates didn't change, but the species were perfectly created. There was no reason to change them, and they couldn't change, so they didn't evolve. And that might be the debate or controversy this questionnaire is addressing. And I should say, I mean, I'm fascinated by history. I don't consider myself a historian here, but when I started to learn about this thing called biogeography, and I think I told you, Kathy, I have to admit this every once in a while, I never took a course in biogeography, but when I got one of my first jobs, I was at the University of Arizona, and there helping me get that job was James H. Brown. So I sat in on his class and fascinated by that. And eventually, Jim, I guess he was getting desperate, couldn't find somebody else to co-author his second edition of his book with him. And he asked me, and I accepted before he regained his sanity. And then I picked the chapter on history of not knowing nearly enough about it, but luckily Jack Briggs, who was our I think he was our first recipient of the Wallace Award. Luckily, Jack Briggs had wrote some fascinating stories about these people and their ideas, and how the ideas and the people and their own background and the societies they grew up in influenced, how well they can contribute. So that's why, I think I knew a little bit about this question about Buffon and Linnaeus. And again, these stories of not just how science advances, but sometimes why it stalls, and how we can learn from that to overcome the inertia against developing and getting other people to accept these new and sometimes revolutionary ideas.
So there's another question here, and I should say all these questions begin with what this one says. It says, "Nice talk, Mark. I would be interested to know where you stand on rewilding with analog species and how this fits into your emphasis on biogeographical place."
Yeah, nothing like another softball question. The rewilding controversy. And let me point out, as a teacher, we actually do have an initiative in the society on teaching biogeography, and giving talks. A good strategy is to give a talk so it fills up the time and there's very little time for questions, especially tough questions like this. Yeah, so that's rewilding has been, I think, at least 2 decades worth of a history on that, and probably longer than before that, but it's really articulated just a few decades ago. And some really, I won't give their names here, but some established biogeographers were involved, or may still be involved, in some of those proposals. But it's difficult to, I don't want to say play God, but to understand the inner workings and the complex relationships among species of animals and plants, etc., well enough to recreate a system. And then quite often those recreations have to be based upon, there has to be a target. And as I indicated in the talk, we're just now beginning to realize what the natural condition was. And then these are natural conditions during, if you look at the Pleistocene, some 20 to 25 different glacial and interglacial cycles. So which cycle do we pick? And do we pick the glacial or the interglacial period? Do we pick number 17 or number 5 or number 4? And so there are major challenges, and again, a lot of the challenges have to do with a better understanding of what the native character of nature was. And the other challenges are developing or at least agreeing on what your set of goals are.
Okay, I promise not too many more hard questions, but this is a hard question. This one said, given rising sea levels and the danger this poses to insular populations, do you think modelling past biogeography is valuable in modelling the future, or is this an apples and oranges comparison? And do you think any particular field of methods, e.g. systematic versus models, are the ideal way to go about this?
And Mark, before you answer, I think Justin had his hand raised as well. So I'm going to unmute him in case he'd like to clarify anything as well while you think.
Mark, yeah, you're coming through now, yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so pretty much just as it was stated, I was just wondering, in terms of the apples versus oranges thing, do you just think that there are too many uncertainties to use the past as a model for the future? And if you think that, you know, any sort of data like ecological versus DNA or particular methods such as systematics versus models and simulations are a better fit to go about, you know, how to see how populations will respond to future climate changes, for example.
Yeah, I would hope those would all be, you know, part of the mix.
Right.
I'd like to view them as complementary approaches rather than, you know, one being better than another. But my initial work and research were simulation modelings of ecological systems, actually looking at the effects of manatees in aquatic systems. And H.T. Odom was, you know, one of the people who strongly influenced me back then. And I got familiar with models, but not that much with the natural systems. But I did appreciate how those models could tell you and redirect your studies to the variables that are more important and more sensitive particular systems. And in the case of using the past as an analog model, I mean, the realism of the past in terms of the appropriate temporal and spatial scales, I mean, just can't be overstated. And quite often, you know, we biogeographers, macroecologists learn from natural experiments because the things we want to study are just beyond the pale of what you could do in a petri dish or a greenhouse. Sorry, Kathy, but you know, we try and combine all those techniques because what we're trying to understand is such a big, complex, interconnected, but beautiful picture.
Right. Well, thank you very much. And, you know,
Sure.
It's been 11 years since I got a lecture from you in my undergrad, so it was fantastic to hear it.
It took you 11 years to subject yourself to another one, huh?
Okay,
I threw myself in and I'm loving it.
good.
Thank
So
you.
I think we've got time for one last question. So I promise this is not, well, it may be a hot one. What is your opinion on how to deal with or to approach many biogeographical patterns, for example, latitude, gradient diversity, and so on, with the increasing biotic homogenization or the accelerated dilution of biogeographic units?
Could that person get on? I'm just not quite sure. And I can't see what you're reading, Kathy. So
yeah. So I think when we're measuring biogeography presently, biotic homogenization and dilution of biogeographic units that's occurring, how does that influence the way we interpret biogeography? I think that's what they're asking.
Yeah, and I think I did share one set of maps by Soren Fabry and Hans Christian Svenning, and they are, you know, their center is one of the main groups that are answering that question in beautiful ways with again highly sophisticated techniques, but visually, you know, striking reconstructions of the natural character and how different it was. And you know, they and others are also looking at not just ecological similarity, but phylogenetic distinctiveness of place as well, because we're now able to better measure that and also, again, visualize that in a number of different ways. And and these questions are wonderful because one of my main messages was the distinctiveness of place and how we're able to now assess it and understand its dynamics and hopefully to reinstate it. The other thing was one of the things I emphasized in terms of conservation biogeography was not just to address the Wallachian shortfall, but to conserve the geographic context of nature. We have many species trying to conserve, and actually there are a number of species, even big species such as elephants, that will be around for millennia. They can breed in zoos and in captivity, but they are losing some of their distinctive characteristics, and so elephants may actually be decreasing in size. We've selected elephants that are more tame, and also there's some elephant populations, I think both in Asia, but also maybe in Africa as well, that have become genetically fixed on tusklessness, losing, what we think of as the identifying, distinguishing characteristics of that species, because the selective pressures are so different once we take them or maintain them outside of the proper geographic, ecological, and evolutionary context.
Extraordinary. Well, I think that's a very good place to stop, actually. I just would like to thank you on behalf of the entire, everyone who's been here, but also the board of IBS for giving the inaugural Vicky Funk lecture. This is going to be a monthly seminar series, once a month, to bring in an eminent biogeographer to talk to us all about the work they're doing. And hopefully, while we're all getting through this pandemic, we can actually manage to carry on having a debate about such an important part of our lives and such an important topic. So thank you very much, Mark. On behalf of everybody, that was an absolutely superb lecture. And thank you for dealing with so many difficult questions in such a fantastic way as well. So thank you everyone for coming, and see you next month, I hope. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you, Kathy. I don't know if that last slide came in, but that's where I wanted to thank you and the rest of the board for the invitation, and also to join you folks in honoring Vicky Funk and all she did for us as a science and as a society. So thanks again.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.